All right, we'll turn away from American politics now and think of Brexit, Article 50, and how should May proceed. And Owen Smith is calling for a second referendum or even a general election. Where do you think the whole scene is at the moment?
I think the main reality that one should remind oneself of here is Article 50 is nothing more than a trigger mechanism for a country leaving the European Community. There is nothing in the statutes or indeed in the treaties which spells out the detail of what happened to a country that leaves. No country has as yet left. Greenland left some years ago, but Greenland was only part of Denmark at the time. No country as such has left. So therefore we are in uncharted waters completely. The thing to remember about Article 50 is this, that the initiative to trigger Article 50 lies entirely with the country concerned, in other words, with the United Kingdom. Nobody can accelerate that. Nobody can force us to it. In fact, if the 27 members, other members of the European Community sat down and said, we want Britain to get on with it, there is nothing they could do about it. If we sat on our bottoms, if we may use the phrase, for another 5 years and did nothing, I don't think they could do a single thing about it at all, at all. I asked a question in the House of Lords some months ago on that very point, and was assured that as a matter of law that was the situation. The next point then is, of course, in view of the clear-cut decision some weeks ago to leave the European Community, a decision made by a majority of about 1.25 million in votes and of about 3.8% in percentage, perfectly clear-cut decision. What can the government do? If the government went back on that, I've no doubt there will be riots. There will be people out on the streets, and understandably so. Although there are very strong feelings amongst many people in many parties that is exactly what should be done.
But why wasn't it made legally binding? Other referendums have in the past.
Well, that raises a huge constitutional question. We have a parliamentary democracy, and a parliamentary democracy rules through Parliament in no other way. A referendum, a plebiscite of the people, is in many respects a torpedo which strikes at the very heart of parliamentary democracy. And the idea of having a consultative referendum, which this was nothing more than that, morally binding, but not legally binding, was of itself, I think, a challenge to the democratic parliamentary process. To make it legally binding would have made it much worse.
Yeah.
So that you can say that the greatest enemy of a parliamentary democracy in many respects is a popular plebiscite. Other people will say, come off it. That is what direct democracy means. But I don't think they're right. In Rome and in Athens, you had direct democracy. The free people would gather in a market square and would vote. But the free people were a very small percentage of the total community, possibly 1%, 2%, 3%, not much more than that. But we have had no direct democracy since then. What you've had in the British democratic process is the overthrow of a tyrannical monarchy. You have that in the Civil War, you have that in the Bill of Rights and in the Glorious Revolution. But it wasn't a transfer of power to the people, it was a transfer to Parliament as trustees of the people.
Yeah.
The third stage, the transfer from Parliament to the people, is still to come.
Yeah, well, this is point, you see, and this is my point, to be honest, although we might disagree on this. There's the sovereignty of Parliament. Yes, there was a clear-cut majority.
Yes.
But still, it wasn't that convincing compared to 75 and things of that kind. Now, what is the role of Parliament now then?
Well, what do you mean by a clear-cut majority and convincing? I'm old enough, and I doubt whether you are, to remember the election of 1964 very vividly.
Just about.
I was a young man at the time, or fairly young, and I can remember that the Labour government, which had been out of office for many, many years and appeared to be in a hopeless state, suddenly had won the election with a majority of 3. David Butler, that brilliant man, wrote a book about that election and showed that although the Labour government had triumphed, and indeed an epoch-making triumph that brought in a whole consequence of Labour dominance for many years, one of the most historic events of the 20th century, nevertheless, the 2,850 votes, selectively given here and there, 50 there,
In
27 there, 50 there, would have given you the same result for the Tories over Labour. In other words, 2,850 would have given you a majority of seats.
So you're saying
Tories.
$1.5 million is
$1.5 million is a hell of a lot compared with that.
So what happens now then in Parliament? You know,
so
is she going to impose the Royal Prerogative?
What you just can't say the majority is small and therefore it doesn't count. The majority is not all that much, but it counts.
Yeah.
As far as the Royal Prerogative is concerned, you're talking of a mechanism. There are some very strong views that are put forward here. I think the most valid view is that of Lord Panic, who is probably the best constitutional lawyer in this country at the moment. And he says, no, you can't do it by the Royal Prerogative. But even if you could, it would be a disgrace to do it in that way. Why should the Mother of Parliaments make one of the most epoch-making decisions ever by way of the Royal Prerogative, rather than by way of a vote and a debate? But I think the practicality of it is very different. Whether you trigger the mechanism by Royal Prerogative or not is neither here nor there. You have the Act of 1972, the European Communities Act. Section 2 of that Act says that all our laws must be subservient to any European law that is to the contrary. You've got to undo that. So even if you use the Royal Prerogative to trigger the mechanism...
There's no way of avoiding debates in Parliament.
There's no way of avoiding a debate in Parliament and legislation in both Houses of Parliament to do away with the 1972 Act.
So isn't this the problem for May, that the Parliament itself is heavily pro-remaining?
Well, the Parliament will have to undo the Act of 1972 if it's going to make the exit a reality. And in order to do that, even if it starts off by having a Royal Prerogative decision, that will be utterly meaningless, and it will be utterly disgraceful for the Mother of Parliaments to make that fateful decision without both Houses of Parliament voicing their views.
So there are interesting times ahead.
There are interesting and very dramatic times ahead.
Treacherous times also, because when you come then to what does this nonsense Brexit means Brexit, what do they mean? Where will we end up? You know what I mean?
We could end up, in theory, with nothing happening, say, for 5 years, 4 or 5 years. We could end up with endless argy-bargy and with an election fought in 4 years' time. And the possibility of a party trying to go to the country for or against Brexit. It's very difficult to fight an election on one single issue. You may start off with one single issue and see that it becomes fissiporous very soon into all manner of other different issues.
Yeah. A bit like the referendum.
A bit like the referendum.
Yeah.
And of course, let's imagine that you had a very complicated negotiation, as indeed it would have to be. Dozens of concessions made. What do? Do you have the Electoral Commission draw up a huge schedule of detailed legalistic matters and then say you're for or against that? How would the ordinary voter understand that?
Yes. Yeah. Well, you know what I mean? The real point is there are so many alternatives, aren't there, of what sort of system, what happens after we leave the single market, or partially in, partially out, be like Norway or like Switzerland, or go along the same road as Canada. Seems to me, and then the whole hundreds upon hundreds, if not thousands, of laws and regulations have to be changed.
True.
It's a morass.
It has something to do, to go back to the earlier point. The first stage of democracy was transfer of power from a tyrannical monarchy to a parliament. The next stage, someday, probably won't live to see it, will be from parliament to the ordinary people. How exactly do you handle that?
Yeah.
At the moment, the idea of a referendum has done no more than to raise that huge question.
Yeah, and also I've been blogging about this. What Cameron has done has put two unions in jeopardy: the European Union and the UK Union. I don't think he thought the thing through.
No, I don't think it ever crossed his mind that he would lose. He's acted very honourably, very, very properly, and fallen on his sword, as it were. But no, I'm sure he must have been very, very, very surprised on that fateful morning. When
But the campaign was too negative. You know, I've heard you talk about there are so many positives to say about Europe.
If you set up a commission of wise men and women to sit as a jury to decide who'd lied most, I think it'd be a pretty croissant thing. Of course, there were lies told about exactly what it would mean in money terms. On both sides.
Yeah.
Chancellor of the Exchequer saying each household would be £4,300 worse off. Worse off straight away.
Yeah.
Nonsense.
Yeah.
Then you found people saying we must remain in Europe for trade reasons. Do you know what trade we're doing with Europe? They're trading with us. We had an imbalance of trade in the last trade year of £67 billion.
Yeah.
You and I can remember when people were banging their heads against walls because the Labour government had a trade deficit of 200 million.
Yeah, 20 odd million.
Yes.
In a month.
Yes, that's right.
Panic in Parliament.
That's right.
The country was in a red.
That's right.
When Callaghan was Chancellor.
Anybody who says that we remain in the European Union for trade reasons is either a fool or a liar.
Well, there we go. That's another one. We'll follow it with interest. I suspect Brexit will last longer than the American election.
Yes, it will. It may be that our children and grandchildren will still be talking of Brexit in some form or another.
Okay.